Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Trailta Radio Show. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll be right back with our special guest. Thank you. Okay, my first question to you is, how did you get started in your career? How did your career begin?
Well, I've always been a writer. It was the only thing I was really good at when I was in school, and so you get encouragement from your teachers and your parents. I pursued it. I majored in English in high school, journalism and communications in college, and have been fortunate that I've been able to make a living writing for more than 35 years now in the PR and journalism world. And about 20 years ago, I got the itch to start writing novels. I think that's the holy grail for a lot of people who write, is to see if we're capable of producing a novel. And that coincided with when I turned 40, and I wanted to have a new challenge. So that's how I got into that. And since that time, I've written 3 novels. I'm here in Vegas, so they've been Las Vegas themed novels. Mm-hmm. And plus, I've had a number of short stories and anthologies published. So it's been a very rewarding and satisfying. It's more than a hobby, but it's not a full-time job. I still have my day job in the PR world. So I'm straddling both, but I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made.
Yeah. What do you find is the most challenging or difficult part being a writer? What are some of the difficulties you find?
Well, number one is simply finding the time, when you work full-time and you've got a family and, time is precious. So the way I solved that is I started getting up very, very early in the morning, like 3:30 in the mornings. I always say I get up earlier than a Navy SEAL, but that's, an hour and a half before I have to start getting ready for work, and that's time that nobody's bothering me, and I can get in some good writing during that time. And then also weekends are helpful, and I also travel a lot through work, so I have found that when I'm on an airplane, when I'm in a hotel room, or waiting, at an airport, that's also good quality time that would otherwise be wasted. So I'll be using that to write as well. So that's one of the challenges. Of course, the other big challenge is marketing. These books don't sell themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to devote a lot of time to trying to, raise awareness among your target markets and make people interested in checking out your books.
Yeah. What are your target audiences? Like, do you have an age group you try to aim for, or is it all ages
Well, it's a good question. The writing audience these days tends to be older. Mm-hmm. The people who buy books. I'm learning that millennials and others who tend to be younger, that audiobook sales actually are on the rise. I do not have any audiobooks for my books, unfortunately. I've got paperbacks and I've got Kindle versions, but so I haven't dived in yet to the audio market, but it's in the back of my mind. So but then that just becomes one more thing to sell, right? So, and if I was going to do it, I would want to make sure that it was done right, very, high level of professionalism, or else I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, the internet is a big thing these days. It's changed a lot, with the audio and the Kindle ebooks.
Very much. I was fortunate when my first book came out. It's called Dice Angel, and it was Vegas behind-the-scenes kind of story, mystery. And that coincided with really the rise of the internet in the early 2000s, and I was able to tap into some trends early on, including the rise of Amazon.com. So I was able to get in there early and take advantage of that. That's become more challenging over the years, too, because when I started, they had fewer books. And now I understand there's 11 million or 12 million books that are posted on Amazon. You're a needle in a haystack unless you're able to steer people toward your section somehow. Which I've been fortunate. I've been able to do a lot through PR, getting news stories and things like that locally and then nationally as well.
Yeah, PR marketing is great, for any, for books especially. You have to get your books out there through marketing and stuff.
No doubt, it's essential. Much of what I do in the world of marketing is personal grassroots efforts, like making presentations to library groups and book clubs and being on panels, with other authors, taking out booths in book festivals and fairs. So I really try to get out there, do bookstore signings, all of that to get my name out there, to get exposure, and to try to sell some books.
Yeah. That was my next question, do you do a lot of...
sorry. I jumped the gun.
That's okay. It was my next question, do you do a lot of book signings and conventions and all that? And
Yeah, I have found that it is very helpful, and it's also good for building personal relationships with your audience. They tend to like meeting the authors, and they ask good questions. If you take a little time to connect with them, you can start building relationships and longer-term fan loyalty, which is, I think, very important. That way, when you come out with a new book, then they already have a good feeling about, you and your work, especially if they liked your prior books.
Yeah, you have to have good connections and with your fans and audiences, because they make you, they're your number one.
Very important. Yeah, without them, you don't really, you're writing for just yourself.
Yeah, and that's not fun, just writing for yourself,
Right. It can be satisfying, but we're really writing because we've got these stories that we need to tell, and we're hoping we make a connection with people. We're hoping they like what we do, and that it becomes meaningful to them in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any upcoming projects or any upcoming books you're writing on? Could you tell us a little bit about that? Or?
Well, sure. My latest book has been out about a year and a half. It's a Vegas ghost story based on a real house my family and I lived in about 15 years ago that we always swore was haunted. Big old house that we remodeled out here. And it seemed like there was a lot of weird stuff going on, and I thought, I'll just turn this into a story, and I created this book called The House Always Wins. So I'm still promoting that, and I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve. But in the meantime, I've got an idea for a sequel to my very first book, Dice Angel, and I'm just now starting the writing process for that sequel. And I'm not the fastest writer in the world, so it could very easily be, by the time I'm done and it goes through multiple edits and then, see if I can find a publisher, either that or do it myself. I've done both. It could easily be 18 to 24 months before it hits the market. But, it's a long, involved process, as you know, to be able to get a quality book out there that you're proud of.
Yeah, it takes time, it's not an overnight bestseller, it takes time, because I've written a few stuff myself. I've never published anything, but I love to write, and, it gets your mind.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're right. That's how it starts, is with the love of writing. And, one of my goals is to try to constantly push myself and see if I can improve my craft as a writer, so that every book that comes out, I'm hoping is better than the one before. And this last one, I actually wrote first person from the point of view of a 25-year-old young woman. And that was a big stretch, and one of the reasons I wanted to do it was to see if I could pull it off and not make a fool of myself. And the reviews are good. So I feel like most people think that I accomplished my goal. Luckily, I've got daughters, and I also work with some young women. So I had a bunch of people who served as consultants to make sure that I was being accurate in terms of, my references, my point of view, all of the different things, my the dialogue, to make sure that she was speaking in a way that younger people talk in this day and age. So I want to make sure I got everything right.
Yeah, you have to make it realistic. Your character's realistic, and the storytelling factual and realistic,
Exactly. So what do you write? Do you write short stories? Are you working on a novel? Do you do fiction, nonfiction?
I do short stories, fiction, mostly. So.
That's great. Good. And do you work alone? Do you collaborate? Do you have somebody to help you edit?
I have someone that helps me edit, but I write alone, and then I have someone that helps me edit it, and I never published any of it, I'm too embarrassed,
right.
I guess, but
well, don't be embarrassed. I mean, you got to get. I talk to a lot of people about that. That you got to get it out there and get some good feedback from people that know what they're doing, like professional editors, for example. And that's the only way that you keep getting better. That, like I say, that's the goal, is to keep trying to get better as a writer. And I think eventually you will find your market, and you'll also be confident that what you're putting out there is the best work you're capable of doing at any given time.
Yeah. I write because I mostly enjoy it, and it makes my mind think, I just like expressing my thoughts and just making all kind of stories, and it's interesting. I've been writing ever since I was a little kid, and it's just constantly grown and more interesting.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great goal, and I feel like those of us who started early are, should be very grateful that we have that particular skill. I feel like it may be genetic to a certain extent. Some people have that gift, and then they're able to nurture it and improve. And others, right brain, left brain kind of thing. I was never very good at math, and I think that's a completely different skill set than writing and being able to tell a good story. Yeah,
everyone has their certain niche, certain trait, everyone's not a writer, not everyone is a...
No. Thankfully, or else there'd be even more books out there to compete with. So.
My last question to you is, what is your advice to people who want to be a writer? And I know we just talked a little bit about this, but do you have any other pieces of advice for people who want to be a writer?
Well, here's one I stole from Stephen King's book. He's got it's kind of half a memoir and half a writing guide. And he said, writers should read a lot. And I think that's great advice, because it sinks in subconsciously and consciously when you're reading quality material, whether it's the classics or new writing, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is. Keep reading and keep paying attention to the way the writer crafts his or her story. And I've even heard people recommend that you should collect words and phrases. In other words, when you're reading something, have you ever had the experience where you read a sentence or a paragraph and it's just so good that you stop for a second and maybe you read it again and you reflect on it, and they say write it down, or type it into your computer and keep an ongoing file of words and phrases that you like, not because you're going to steal them, but because they can serve as inspiration and as models for a certain type of thinking and a certain type of writing that may serve you well down the road. So I think that's all good advice. What it all boils down to is get in the habit of writing 4, 5, 6 times a week and have a goal, whether it's X number of words or an hour a day or whatever it might be. It's good to develop a writing habit and try to stick with it as best you can.